Hello! Today I am going to be reviewing the highly anticipated debut solo album by Cuban-American singer Camila Cabello. This album is titled Camila, self-titled. It was originally going to be titled The Hurting, The Healing, The Loving, and it got scrapped as an idea, although a lot of the songs that she had originally planned for that album still made it onto this version. Unfortunately, and this is understandable, songs like Crying in the Club, which were released over the summer, which is a song written by Sia, that Camila didn't really have anything to do with the creation of, did not get included on this album, along with another promotional single called OMG featuring Quavo, which was released at the same time as Havana featuring Young Thug. Havana versus Quavo, which one was it that took her to the top? Well, it was the one that the record label did not predict. I could tell that the record label did not have a lot of faith in Havana, and it has now been confirmed that the record label that she signed to Epic Records did not believe that Havana could be a huge single, and I love that she proved them wrong. Because Havana is different from OMG in a lot of ways, and I'm not saying OMG is a bad song. I actually really like that song, but for a lot of different reasons. It's more of like a guilty pleasure song, and I'm actually glad that that was not the song that they chose to catapult her mainstream career with. Crying in the Club I do feel a little sad about. I feel like that song deserved better. I think it was a powerful intro sort of single, and it was a good promo single for her, and I like the message behind it because it was that bittersweet but like ecstatic dance song. And yeah, it was a little predictable in terms of pop music, but I also think it had a little bit of that tropical sound that still made it feel Camila, like Camila's sound, and I think it fits very well into the context of this album. We have other like sort of more Latin and reggaeton pop songs like She Loves Control in this album that I feel like Crying in the Club is the perfect sister track to. So, I mean, I can understand why her record label decided not to include them, or why Camila herself decided not to include them, because they don't represent her as much. But the album is really short. It's only like a little over a half hour long, and there really should be a little bit more songs on it, and I think that the deluxe version should include OMG and Crying in the Club. So I put them at the end just to sort of tie up the year that Camila has had since she left Fifth Harmony a year ago in this big dramatic split up. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not a huge fan of Fifth Harmony's music, but Camila always stood out from Fifth Harmony. She had the most recognizable voice, and she really did have a little bit of that star power. But what I think makes Camila more interesting was her softer, more introverted aspects. She's a very creative individual, and she talks a lot about feeling as though with her solo project, she really was able to actually explore her own personality and create something that felt like her own, instead of putting out a mass-produced record like the things she was doing with Fifth Harmony, where almost no songwriting was done by the actual singers themselves. They're just performing and dancing. And, you know, it was a little over-sexualized for Camila's taste. She likes to be a little bit more modest with that, which is something I certainly can understand. So I just feel like Camila has something that's a little bit more relatable and a little bit more grounded. And I think that that is something that actually I think in this day and age is really necessary for her to actually have some real staying power. You know, artists like Ed Sheeran, they're not that provocative, and yet everyone still loves them. I'm starting to notice this trend where these hypersexualized artists like Iggy Azalea and Rita Ora, they're not actually doing as well in the charts anymore. And I think that there's starting to be a trend with these artists that try to come out and start out with that image. I think it actually makes them more forgettable. And to me, it always did. But I think in pop culture, that might be a trend that we're starting to see. I really hope so. Because Harry Styles is another good example. And to some extent, Shawn Mendes as well. Camila grew up in Miami. Well, she actually was born in Cuba. And so the Latin influences on this album are very strong. And of course, the main single, which talks about where she was born, Havana, which is the capital of Cuba, is this very kind of biographical yet not biographical, anthemic yet slow-burning kind of fun pop song. And it definitely feels refreshing. And that's why I listed it as one of my top 25 songs of 2017. Never Be the Same is the opening track on this record, and it's the second single for this album, and it's a little bit different from Havana. It's a little bit more electropop sounding. It definitely has less like live instruments, and it's one of the songs that definitely goes more in that direction, but I don't necessarily have a problem with it. At first, maybe I was a little disconcerted because the melody is not instantaneously grabbing. It's a little bit, you know, one moment it's like sky-high notes that are very high falsetto notes that I think she reaches very deftly. I don't necessarily think Camila has the most range in her voice, but that's okay because her voice is not perfect. It has a quality to it that's a little silky and smooth, but also a little bit emotional. All of her like deliveries feel emotional. There's just something about it, and I so recognizable, and I think so airy and smooth, and yet at the same time vulnerable, which makes for some really emotional ballads on this album. And those are the songs that really hit home. But she definitely weaves between pop hits that have some Skrillex featured in there on "She Loves Control," which is definitely a reggaeton inspired dance hall song, which imbues a lot of these songs with a Caribbean warmth and texture, which is something I really actually am interested in, especially in the winter months in the Northern Hemisphere when it's quite cold and you want something that makes you think about the beach. But Never Be the Same is very emotional, and I do think it has some real power behind it. The way she keeps building on more layers of instrumentals onto the chorus really starts to feel like super impactful, and over time it really starts to grab you. All These Years is the second song, and I would say that is probably the most underwhelming song on this record. That's not to say it's bad, but it just feels a little too limited and minimalistic. There's heavy uses of spaces before it repeats itself, and then there is a little bit of vocal manipulation and layering that I don't necessarily think suits the song. It's a soft song, and so that electronic tinge to it kind of makes it feel less organic and more synthetic. And there's a guitar backing, and then it kind of doesn't know where it wants to go. You know, does it want to be folksy? Does it want to be a pop song? Or does it want to be electro? So it's the only song that feels like it's a little bit hanging there. But it's okay, because the rest of this album really does hit it out of the park for me, or at least to it more than I was expecting. My expectations were not sky high for this. She Loves Control, I already talked about. It's just fun. It's definitely a song I could see being a single. It has a little bit of a Shakira vibe to it, and it's something that, you know, I would expect to see Camila experiment with. And then we have Havana, which was that huge, fun, big, flavorful salsa, you know, and merengue kind of inspired Latin song that, you know, has that amazing music video, which is an ode to the telenovelas and the Latin Havana, Cuban culture, Cuban jazz. The Young Thug part, I do say I could scrap. It's probably the one, it's the only feature on the album. It's the one part I'm not really that crazy about. Then we have Inside Out. I was so excited to hear Inside Out because this song was performed during the Bruno Mars tour when she was an opening act for it over the summer, along with several other songs like OMG, Never Be the Same, Havana. And I was so interested by the, you know, Caribbean sound, the marimba that's used, and then that playful, you know, Jamaican feel to it. And it's so cute. It's a little bit Disney and it's a little bit Nickelodeon, but I don't necessarily mind it. You know, Camila is a young emerging artist and she wants to celebrate some of the more positive and happy aspects of her culture and her, you know, musical influence. And I don't necessarily see, you know, like sometimes people like find it a little bit too cheesy, but I don't necessarily find her being so shimmery and so almost openly optimistic in this song. I mean, this song is just a super devout love song, and it just celebrates love in general, and it also celebrates that, you know, Caribbean breeze kind of sound, and I find it just really fun and affecting. It's not something I would take that seriously. She does speak in Spanish, which is nice as well to hear that native tongue roll off her lips. And I do find it just to be, again, when I say it's a little Disney, there's the next song, we have Consequences. That feels a little bit like the makings of a Disney ballad. It has that very soft piano accented vocal delivery, which is very cinematic, and it's very shimmery, and it's like a soft focus filter on a photograph. And I find that that kind of describes a lot of these songs. I think there's like all these filters on Instagram that are like kind of warmer, and they add warmer tones and they kind of soften things and they make things look a little throwback and nostalgic. And that's what this album does, is it takes something that could be just sort of a little bit more of a bland piano ballad. I'm not saying this piano ballad structure is bland, but it's simplistic. It doesn't, you know, do hoops and whistles, but there's something added to it that adds this airiness and atmospheric. And then of course her hushed delivery of how she sings, "Loving you was young and wild and free, cool and hot and sweet. Loving you was sunshine, safe and sound, a safe place to let down my defenses, but loving you had consequences." Obviously, this is a bittersweet, you know, I loved you so much, but you broke me down ultimately. And there is that triumphant yet broken sound to it that gives it a hopeful yet hopeless kind of theme, and it definitely speaks to my sensibilities because those are the kinds of songs that really affect me the most emotionally. And I definitely think all of the emotion is really centered on this song very beautifully, and it's short and it doesn't linger too long on any one given note. So it kind of just flirts around you, but it's so sincere. And I do think that when ballads are done sometimes by these pop singers, I do sometimes find, then they have the choral, they have the orchestra, they have the string. It feels a little bit cliched and it feels a little forced. This song, I was worried would go in that direction when I first started listening to it, but it feels softer and it just feels like it was something that was composed, like I said, in a bedroom without a lot of record executives hounding her about making it sound like a Christina Aguilera ballad or a traditional Demi Lovato, Selena Gomez ballad. Not to say anything against those artists, but this just has Camila's own sound attached to it. We also have Real Friends. Now, Real Friends does tend to go a little bit more in the Ed Sheeran, Justin Bieber direction. A lot of people pulled those artists up as inspiration and sound because it is that guitar riff and her just sort of playfully singing along, but also kind of mournfully reflecting on how she feels so alone in this small town and is looking for people who aren't going to stab her in the back and people who are actually going to love her for who she is. I could definitely see this song being something she's reflecting about her time in Fifth Harmony. I always kind of envision Camila being that one girl in the group that just doesn't want to necessarily always be in the center of attention, and she kind of wants to do her own thing sometimes, and the other girls kind of give her a hard time for it, maybe make fun of her for it. Let's be real, I'm a Camila fan. I'm not really a big fan of Fifth Harmony. I do think that the best music those girls are going to make is when they do go solo. I can't wait for Normani to go solo. I think she's got some real potential there. But I just don't think that girl group is going to work very much more. And I do think that there's this sort of like, extroverted presentation side to that group. And Camila represents the sort of introversion of what these big girl groups can be, or even boy groups like One Direction. She's bringing that softer introspection. And that's what this album is a lot of, which I think record executives were not expecting her to want to do, thinking she might want to make this like big pop piece with like trap and like reggae and hip hop influences featuring rap artists. No, that's why they scrapped OMG. OMG is not as indicative of what this album is not about twerking in the club. Nothing wrong with that. And that's why I do think OMG fits, because it's good to have a little bit of that in there, a little bit of spice. But the whole album is not representative of that whatsoever. Something's Gotta Give is another ballad, but this one swells up a lot more. It has a lot more production to it. It is very haunting and it is very melancholic and dramatic. I think that when I first heard it, it grabbed me immediately. Now, upon repeated listens, there are parts to it that I wish were a little done differently in terms of like note holds and stuff, but I do think it still is a beautifully composed song. The very, very poignant line of "no reason to stay is a good reason to go." And I love how instead of just holding go at that one note, she goes up one more note. It adds this like hopeful kind of soul to it. And then the production is a little bit electronic, but it feels like it's just complementing her voice. It never feels like it wants to overtake it. So it's this nice, affecting, soulful, emotional song. Then we get the tempo pecked up again because we have to end the album a little bit more high octane. We have In the Dark and Into It. These are two songs that I would admit are a little bit more in the Selena Gomez direction. In the Dark is a little bit more dark and industrial in some ways. It's very electronic. And I actually think, though, this song is definitely about a guy and she's singing about, who are you when no one's looking? Why won't you show me who you really are? Why are you sugarcoating everything? Because this relationship isn't going to work if you don't show me all of you and if you're not honest. I can see this also being about like a girlfriend of hers, possibly a friend from Fifth Harmony. I want to see who you really are. And that's why I'm so frustrated with this friendship, because you think that, there's this really nice line that says you don't have to show skin to strip. And when I first heard that line, it immediately made me think of Fifth Harmony. And I know that I don't think she really was singing about Fifth Harmony. I know she doesn't want to bring up that drama. This is probably about a boyfriend. But I feel like she's kind of hinting at, Camila's made it a statement to not show a lot of skin and to be a little bit more emotional and, put more emphasis on that. And it's very true. You don't have to show skin to strip down, metaphorically. And it's really important to strip down sometimes in front of someone in terms of communicating and being vulnerable, and that's what she's asking for on this song. Into It is very electro pop. It's just fun. It's not that memorable to me, but I do think that the verse lead up to the chorus is more interesting because it's just so optimistic and like sexy. And then the beat breakdown is fun and it definitely feels predictable. And that's probably the one problem I have for it, is that the song maybe does feel a little too predictable. Like it is like another song that's on the radio that could be on a Fifth Harmony record. Like if there was one song that feels Fifth Harmony, it would probably be Into It. And that's fine. Again, this album feels well-rounded. It's not all one color, even though they all also feel cohesive. Like I said, I add OMG featuring Quavo and Crying in the Club at the end of this record because listening to them all, that makes it now a lot more full-bodied. And it kind of comes full circle because Crying in the Club was the first song that she released as a solo artist. And now, I would also argue you could add I Have Questions in there as well, which was another song that she released alongside with Crying in the Club. I didn't find I Have Questions sonically to be as interesting, but it was a very emotional song. And I must admit, I'm still very shocked that she chose to scrap that song. I mean, it was very powerful and pained and emotional, though I know she probably didn't have as much to do with the writing of it. That might have a reason to do with it, but I was expecting for her to at least include that song, so I would argue you could also add I Have Questions and then turn it up with OMG and Crying in the Club. Because you need to turn it up a little bit and end with Crying in the Club because it's so ecstatic and exuberant and at the same time bittersweet, and I think that emphasizes where this album was trying to go. And I think it's a very solid debut effort. It's the first album of 2018 for me to review, which is always exciting. And I really am hopeful about Camila's career projection. I'm glad that she decided to be meticulous about this record and make sure she didn't rush release it. And I'm glad that she also felt like she wanted to put songs that really only represented the album and her, not songs that were just force-fed to radio, even though I still think those songs deserve to be there. It shows she really cares about the product that she's making, and she doesn't want to just make things for charts, although Havana definitely gave her that big #1, which was huge. It was like this big record-breaking, 5 weeks at #1, I think, for a while. Can't remember. I don't know. I don't like to keep track of those numbers about radio and Billboard. It's all numbers. It doesn't matter to me. So I don't think Camila cares that much either, except she's got so much great exposure for the album. So let me know what you thought in the comments. I definitely just very in love with this album, and it's short. I wish it was a little longer, and I wish there were a few more songs, and I wish some of the songs maybe were just like 20 to 30 seconds longer, because some things do kind of feel very punctuated and short and accented. But at the same time, at least you don't feel like anything overstays its welcome. So I hope you enjoyed this review, and if you enjoyed, I hope you like and subscribe. I will plan to do plenty of new reviews into 2018. Thanks so much for watching. Have a wonderful day. Bye.